Hello again, everyone, and welcome to a video on Ansible. Ansible is one of my favorite technologies. I just love working with it. And in today's video, I'm going to teach you guys how to install Ansible and set up an environment that you can use to start automating your configurations with your Linode servers. So let's go ahead and dive into Ansible. This is going to be a lot of fun. So before we begin, I want to take a moment to let you guys know how this tutorial is going to be structured. As you can see, I have 3 Linode instances already created. I have a controller and 2 servers. And the reason why I set it up like this is to simulate how it's actually done in the real world. And the reason why I decided to structure it with 3 nodes is because I wanted to simulate exactly how Ansible is used in the real world. Now, obviously, the entire point of Ansible is to automate things, and typically what you are going to automate with Ansible is the automation of servers, which is why I have these 2 servers right here. At the top here, I have an instance that I named Ansible Controller. And it's a very common use case with Ansible to have a central configuration management server, and the job of that server is to configure all the other servers. Now, Ansible doesn't require an agent, so there is no actual server and agent relationship here. And what that means is that the Ansible controller is going to configure the other servers via SSH. So unlike Chef and Puppet, for example, there's no agent that you actually have to install on the servers. Now, another style for using Ansible is to not have a central Ansible controller or a central configuration management server. Perhaps you, as the admin for your organization, you have your Ansible scripts and version control in a protected repository. And periodically, perhaps you will download or clone the repository containing your Ansible playbooks onto your laptop, and then you'll use your laptop to connect to all of the servers and get them configured. In that case, your laptop becomes the Ansible controller. There's no hard rule about where your Ansible controller needs to be, or even what kind of device it has to be. All it needs is to be able to access the other servers via SSH, and if it meets that requirement, then, well, you're all set. But in regards to this particular tutorial, I'm going to utilize the first scenario, which is the Ansible controller being the central configuration management server in your organization, and we're going to use this server to configure the other 2. And here on my terminal, I am connected to all 3 servers. And you can see on the bar at the bottom of the screen which of the 3 I'm connected to at any one time. So right now, I'm on the controller, now I'm on server 1, and now I am on server number 2. So I'm going to be switching back and forth between these servers as we go along. And this way, you can actually follow along with this hypothetical scenario of having 2 servers and 1 controller. We're going to configure the controller, and then we will use the controller to set up the other 2 servers. So let's go ahead and get started. So here on the controller, what I'm going to do is generate an SSH key because the controller will use SSH to connect to the other servers, and we want to make sure that we have a secure key for that purpose. So let's go ahead and generate one. And the command that we will utilize for that purpose is ssh-keygen. And the key type will be RSA. And the bit size will be 4096. So this is going to allow us to create a brand new key. And here it's actually asking me where I would like to store the key. And this is very important because you might already have a key at this location. And what this command is going to do is it's going to create a key, in my case, in /home/j.ssh with a file name of id_RSA. And that might be okay if you don't already have a key, but if you do have a key at that path, this command will overwrite it if you don't give it a different path. And this is very important because you might have already created a key in order to connect to your Linode instances, and you definitely don't want to overwrite your key if that's the case. But even if you don't already have a key, I still recommend that you create the key with a different file name. So what I'm going to do is use the same starting path of /home/j.ssh, but I'm going to give the key a different name. And I'm just going to call it Ansible in my case. The font actually wrapped a little bit, so you can't actually see the whole file name. But essentially what I did was I used the same path /home/j.ssh, and then I just gave it the name Ansible instead of this right here. And as long as I don't already have a key named Ansible, which I don't, then I don't have to worry about it being overwritten. And I also like having a separate key for Ansible because that just gives you even more control. So I'll press enter. And now it wants me to create a passphrase. Now normally a passphrase is a great idea because it increases the strength of your key. For the sake of simplicity though, I'm not going to actually add a passphrase to my key right now. That's beyond the scope of this video. So I'll just press enter. And then I'll press enter again. And it should have created the key. So let's see if it did. And inside the .ssh directory, inside my home directory, it did create the key. The file name is Ansible, and that's the private key. And then the second file that ends in .pub is the public key. The public key is, well, public, and the private key, the file that does not have the .pub extension, that's private. We definitely don't want to show the contents of that key to anyone. But we've created the key, so we're all set there. And what I'm going to do is copy that key over to both of the other servers. And there's actually a dedicated command that we can use to copy the key over, and that is ssh-copy-id, just like that. And then we'll give it -i, and we will type the path to the key that we want to copy over. And that's in my home directory inside the .ssh folder. And the file name is Ansible. And then what we're going to do is copy that over to server 1. So I will use the username of root and then and I'll paste in the IP address right here. Let's press enter. I'll say yes. I'll type in the password for the root account on server number 1. And it tells me that the key has been added. So that's pretty cool. Next, I'm going to repeat that process against server number 2. We want to copy that key over there as well. And I'll paste it in right here. Same process again. And there we go. Now I have copied the key that we have just created over to both of the other servers. So now that means that we should be able to connect to the other servers to run commands against them. So let's go ahead and see a working example of the key in action. So what I'm going to do is type SSH and then -i. And again, we are going to use the Ansible key, and we are going to use that against root. The @ symbol, I'll paste in the IP address, and that's the IP address of server number 2. And then I'm going to add a command at the end. This will be fun. And the command is going to be apt update. So I'll press enter. And notice that it didn't even ask me for a password at all. It just went ahead and ran the command apt update. So if you didn't already know that you can use SSH to run one-off commands, well, now you know. But what this has done for us is that this has proven that the key is working. The command that I ran, SSH-I, then the path to the key, then the username, and then the IP address of one of the server nodes. This was for server number 2, and then the command apt update. And as you can see, the command immediately ran. So the key is working. I'll leave it up to you to test the key on the other server, but let's go ahead and continue. Now, the next thing that I'm going to install is called Miniconda. And Miniconda is a tool that we can use to set up a virtualized Ansible environment. And a virtualized environment is not a virtual machine, but think of it as a virtual directory with all the dependencies and tools that you need inside that directory. So that way it doesn't depend on the underlying system in order to function. It basically makes your development portable. So this is optional, but highly recommended. I'm going to paste the command in right here. And this command, as well as the others, can be found in the documentation article that matches this video if you want to go ahead and copy and paste this command. But essentially what we're doing is we are using the curl command to pull down a bash script that'll help us get Miniconda installed. So when I press enter, it's pretty much immediate. And as you can see, we have the file right there. And what we're going to do is run bash, and we are going to run that against the file that we have just downloaded. So I'll press enter. And there's a lot of text here, so I will scroll all the way to the end. So I'll accept the terms, and I'll accept the defaults for the location. And now it is asking me if I would like to initialize Conda right now, and I do. So I will say yes. And now it's telling me that it's all set and ready to go. Well, almost. What we should do is run exec bash-l. And what that's going to do is restart our session. Essentially, it's going to make the path variables take effect, which we will need in order to use this utility. And there we go. And now we should be ready to go ahead and start using Conda to create our environment that will serve as the foundation for our development of our Ansible solution. So using Conda, what we're going to do right now is create the virtual environment that we will use for Ansible. And the command for that purpose is conda create and -n to give it a name. We will name it Ansible-dev. And then we will set Python equal to 3. That's going to set the version of Python that we will be using. So let's go ahead and proceed. And there we go. Looks like it was created. If we list the storage, we have the Miniconda folder right there. That was set up when we installed Miniconda. And inside there, we have an envs folder. And inside that folder, we have our Ansible dev folder. So if you are curious where the virtual environment is being stored, well, now you know. In order to utilize the virtual environment, we will need to activate it. And to do that, we will run conda activate, and then we type the name of the virtual environment that we want to activate. And we named it Ansible-dev, so we'll give it the same name here and press enter. Now notice that the command prompt has changed and it now shows the name of the virtual environment there on the left. So that's a quick and easy way to know which virtual environment you're actually working with. Then we can also run python-version. That'll show us which version of Python we're actually working with. In this case, version 3.9.1. And now we are actually ready to install Ansible. So what I'm going to do right now is show you the process of installing Ansible on Debian. If you are running Ubuntu on your controller, for example, then the same commands will work just fine. Now the commands that I'm about to show you work just fine on Debian because that's what I'm using, but these commands will also work on Ubuntu as well because both Debian and Ubuntu will utilize the same commands. So what I'm going to do is run sudo nano, and what we're going to do is create a repository file at /etc/apt sources.list.d, and then inside there we're going to call it ansible.list. I'll put in my super secret password. And we now have this file, which is currently empty. I'm going to paste the repository line right in here. And even though it says Ubuntu and Trusty, don't worry about that. Even though I'm running on Debian, the same repository is used for Ubuntu as well as Debian. So just keep that in mind. You could go ahead and use the same source. So Control O and then Enter to save the file, and Control X to exit out. So next, a key is required for the repository in order for it to function. But before we can actually install that key, we need to install a package. So I'm going to run sudo apt install GNU-PG. And I'll press enter. And then we can go ahead and install the actual apt key. I'll paste in that command right here. It's kind of a long one, so again, check out the documentation page if you want to go ahead and copy the command instead of type it all out by hand, we're going to use the apt key command with sudo. We need to pull the key from the key server. I'll press enter. And there we go. The key has been imported. So then we can run sudo apt update. And notice that the repository that we have added, the URL, is there in the output. And then finally, we can go ahead and get Ansible installed. And to do that, it's just simply sudo apt install Ansible. I'll press enter. Enter again. And now we should have Ansible at our disposal. Let's go ahead and find out. So I will run Ansible-Playbook and then -- version. And the command is recognized. We have Ansible version 2.9.18. And then it gives us some information about Ansible, as you can see here. So now we have Ansible installed, and we are ready to start using it to configure the other servers. Now, the first thing to understand about Ansible is that it works with inventory files. When you install Ansible, it creates an inventory file sample for you, and we're going to edit that file right now. So sudo nano, then /etc/ansible/hosts. Now we have quite a bit of information here, don't we? We have all these comments and all these samples here. So actually, I'm going to hold Control and press X to exit out of here. And I'm going to make a backup of that file. Perhaps the contents are going to be useful for us in the future, so we don't want to outright delete it. So I will run sudo mv for move and then /etc/ansible. And then what I'll do is rename that to host.bak. Simple enough. So now we can edit the file, which doesn't even exist anymore. We can actually create a brand new inventory file from scratch. And what I'm going to do is create two groups. Ansible allows you to split up your hosts into groups, which makes sense because not all of your servers are going to be used for the same purpose. You might have a file server, a database server, a web server, and so on. And you'll definitely want to be able to differentiate your config based on the server you are actually setting up. So as an example, I will create a group called Nginx, and we create groups in square brackets, like you see there. And then we type the IP address for the server that we actually want to be a part of that group. Now, if you have already set up DNS for your Linode instance, you can use the fully qualified domain name instead of the IP address. But just to keep it simple, I'm going to use the IP address. So what I'm going to do is nominate server number 1 to be a part of the Nginx group. So I'll paste in the IP address for that server right here, and there it is. Then I'll go to a new line and another one, and that'll help me add a blank line in between the two. And then the next group that I'm going to create, I will call it, let's call it WordPress. Again, in square brackets. And then I will paste in the IP address for the second server right here. And what I'll also do is rename the tab. So I'll go over here to server number 1. I will rename that one to Nginx. And server number 2, again, is WordPress. So what I'll do now is save the file. Exit out. So let's go ahead and run a test command. And this command will help us ensure that the Ansible controller is able to connect to both of the servers that we have added to the inventory file. So what we're going to do is run Ansible. And then we're going to run it against all. And all in this context means that we want to target every single host that we have in the inventory file, regardless of the group that that host happens to be in. We want to run this against everything. And the user that we will use for this connection is root. And the module is going to be ping. The ping module in Ansible is not the same thing as the ping command that you might already be accustomed to. Ping in Ansible is actually going to create a real connection. And you'll see some output from the servers if this command is successful in just a moment. But just keep in mind that ping in Ansible is actually more than just a simple ping test. it's going to pull some real information from those servers. Now, earlier in the video, we created a key that we want to use to facilitate the connections between the Ansible controller and the servers. So we will use the argument --private -key, and then we will give it the path to the private key file, which is in our home directory under .ssh. And we name the key simply Ansible. That's the key that we want to use to make the connection to those servers. So I'll press enter. And would you look at that? We have the message success. It shows it twice. So as you can see, it first made a connection to this particular host at this IP address. And then it reported back what the Ansible interpreter is for that particular host. And then it did the same thing for the other server. So from this, we can actually glean that Ansible is working properly. The Ansible controller was able to reach the Nginx server, or the server that's going to become the Nginx server, and it was able to reach the WordPress server as well. So far so good. So now let's go ahead and actually run a playbook against our servers. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail in regards to the structure of a playbook, but I'll give you guys a simple example that you can use to actually get started right now. And there's going to be more Ansible videos on this channel that'll take your knowledge even further. So let's go ahead and create our sample playbook right now. Now what I'm going to do is create it with the name of servers.yml. Ansible playbooks use the YAML format, and that's what the YML extension actually is. So what I'm going to do is paste in a quick playbook that'll get those servers configured, and then I'll explain exactly how it works. So what I've done is I whipped up a quick playbook that's going to get our servers configured. And this is it right here. So let's go over it. On the first line right here, we have 3 hyphens. That's part of the YAML format. That's the beginning of the file. And here we have a play. We are going to start each play with a hyphen right here and then a space. And then we have host. We want to tell Ansible which host we want to target in this section of the playbook. So we're going to set the host equal to Nginx, which means it's going to target the hosts that are listed in the inventory file under the bracket labeled Nginx. And on those hosts, what we want to do is run some tasks. And we're only going to run one. We're going to run a task with a name of install Nginx. Now, when you are going to run a play, and that's what this is called, we're going to set the name. We're going to use a hyphen right here for the beginning. Now, we could have omitted name if we didn't want to show a name here, and then we would have had to have the hyphen under package. So essentially, whatever the top layer is for a task will need the hyphen. So name, again, is optional. I like to include that because that's going to show in the output whatever you type here, which makes it very easy to know what the playbook is actually doing. We're going to use the package module. We're going to install a package by the name of Nginx. And we're going to set the state to be latest. And then here we're doing the exact same thing, but against the WordPress host. And instead of the Nginx package, we are installing the WordPress package. Let's go ahead and save the file and exit out. And now we can go ahead and run the playbook and see what happens. So in order to do so, I'm going to run Ansible-Playbook. We'll set the private key again to the same one that we used last time. And then I'm going to run it against the playbook that we've just created, servers.yml, just like that. Let's see what happens. And as you can see, everything was a complete success. We can see that we have changed equals 1 on each of the 2 instances. So for the install Nginx play, we see changed right here. And then we see the same thing right here for WordPress. So now that we've run that playbook, here on the second tab, we can go ahead and see what's different. And we told this particular server to install the Nginx package. And we could see that it's running. So when Ansible actually connected to this particular host, it ran the play to install Nginx. And as we could see from the earlier output, it did do that. And now when we check the status of Nginx on this particular host, we see that it is running. And what we can also do is run curl against localhost. And we get some output from the Nginx instance right here, so it's definitely working. So here we have WordPress, and WordPress is a little bit more complicated than just simply Nginx, but we did install the WordPress package, so definitely something has changed. So let's check the status of Apache 2. And we didn't actually tell it to install Apache when we ran the playbook. Apache was a dependency of the WordPress package, which then got installed and is now running. And similar to the other server, we can run curl against localhost. And we see some information here as well. And that's actually the start page for Apache. That's not specific to WordPress. But the fact that Apache is on the instance means that everything was a success. Again, setting up a WordPress server, setting up a proper WordPress server is beyond the scope of this particular video. However, this playbook right here serves as a proof of concept because we were able to set up two groups and we were able to differentiate this playbook to run specific tasks against specific servers. So the server that's in the Nginx group got the Nginx package, and then the server that's in the WordPress group got the WordPress package installed. So it's actually working just fine. And from here, you can add additional customizations as you learn and grow your skills in Ansible. So what we've done in this video is create a foundation on which we can build further things, further automations as we learn more about Ansible. As I'm sure you'll agree after you've gone through the examples in this video, Ansible is awesome. It's a lot of fun to work with. For me, it kind of feels like a superpower. You can write a playbook, execute it, and then all of your servers will do your bidding all from one playbook. It's just magical and it's a lot of fun. So we have additional Ansible and infrastructure as code content coming. So stay tuned to this very channel and you'll be the first to see any future videos we do on the subject if you subscribe. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching and have an awesome day.